Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us on an all-new episode of American Roundball. I'm Hali Oughton. It's finally championship week, which means this is our last time welcoming in Monica McNutt to the studio before we're at Mohegan Sun. Monica, as a former player, what is this week like preparing for the championship and a winner-go-home situation?
Well, it's essentially a new season, Haley, so you certainly are looking forward to an opportunity to continue to play basketball, but you also understand in this new season, you have to win in order to advance.
Well, today we're going to be talking about the road to the finals, so let's start off by taking a look at the championship bracket. What was the most significant result from the final week of conference play that impacted the seeding?
It would have to be head coach Jamel Elliott and her Cincinnati Bearcats squad. I mean, we talked about that top four being coveted by every team in the league all season long because that's the group that earns a first round bye. It was Houston hanging in that fourth spot for much of the season, but I think last week on this show, Haley, we talked about the gauntlet that Houston had coming down the stretch to finish the regular season, and it appears that it did catch up with them. Once again, they fell into that old habit of getting behind, hoping to launch this comeback, and came up a little bit short against Cincinnati in Cincinnati. So the Bearcats take over the fourth spot.
As you take a look at the potential quarterfinal matchups, which one could be the most intriguing?
Well, I think we stick with the two teams that we're talking about. I think Houston will advance. They'll knock off Tulsa in their first round. At least that's my prediction. And then they'll have to face Cincinnati, who has that fourth seed. And that game will be on Sunday night. So I think that this is one that will be, it won't be a rubber match because Cincinnati actually beat Houston in both matchups, this team. But you can imagine that the Cougars will have revenge on their mind. I think the key in this one is Houston is going to have to break their form a little bit. They cannot afford to get into a deficit. Specifically, they can't give up a fourth quarter run where it seems that they struggle to catch up with those teams that they allow to get an 8 to 10 point lead in the fourth quarter. Sometimes they just can't close that gap. They've been able to pull off these comebacks largely when they're at home in Houston, but it's just not the same in a conference tournament setting. So I think considering the history that Coach Elliott has in terms of being a Husky, she's going to have her team absolutely ready to go. And any window of opportunity or any gap that they can create, they're not going to relinquish.
Let's move on to the semifinal round. We could potentially see a UCF-USF rematch, a game that was very competitive just a couple of weeks ago. If we were to see that, what would you expect to see in that game with so much on the line?
So that's going to be really interesting, Haley. When you talk about chess matches in the game of basketball, this is one that saying rings most true, loud, and clear for me. When you look at the matchups between these teams in the regular season, coming down the stretch, we got that phenomenal overtime battle in the war on I-4, in which USF ultimately was able to take over UCF, who forced the overtime period. But when you look at the stats in that particular game, the Bulls were stifled from behind the arc, which is a huge piece of what they're able to do offensively. They struggled to shoot the three ball. I think Kitty Alexa got hot behind the three late in the fourth quarter and then into the overtime period. And when I say hot, I mean that she hit timely shots, but she still wasn't shooting her signature percentage from that line. And then on the flip side, you look at what the Knights were able to do. They forced the Bulls to sit down and defend. Now, I don't think that they are a slouch defensive team, talking about Jose Fernandez's group, but I do think when you are penetrating at them and you're attacking the paint, you force their bigs like Maria Jespersen to make some tough decisions. And if you can get foul trouble brought into the equation, then you're looking at who can stay on the floor. So I think in this particular matchup, we have to watch how USF is able to shoot the ball. If they are efficient as they have been for most of the season, I think the Knights are going to be in a little bit of a trouble. But on the flip side, if the Knights can get second chance opportunities, and command the boards as well as attack the paint, I think they put themselves in a position to really make the Bulls have to work, which in turn takes away a little bit of their legs, and maybe you see that reap some benefit in a lack of being able to knock down the long ball.
Let's continue looking ahead. Obviously, a lot of basketball to be played before the championship final, but should the seeding hold true and the 1 and 2 seeds meet in that tournament final, that would be another USF-UConn rematch 4 years in a row now. If you're the Bulls, how do you approach playing that game for the 4th time in the tournament final, but the 3rd time this season?
So here's the thing with playing UConn. I don't think any coach ever walks away and says, good effort, guys. They're UConn. I mean, just good effort. Let's move on. That's never it. You go back and you watch the tape. Now, I think the first regular season meeting between UConn and USF UConn heard the buzz. You know, USF was a team that pushed them a little bit last year. They silenced that one in pretty convincing fashion, winning that game 100-49. And then even down the stretch to finish off the regular season, it's talking about close to a 30-point margin that UConn was able to handle. But I think if you're Jose Fernandez and you have this group of seniors who has been phenomenal and had an incredible season, you go back and look at the tape and you literally break this thing down possession by possession. What are things that we can control? Because you know that when you play a team like UConn, you're hoping and praying that you essentially play a perfect game. So you certainly have to control the things that you can control and understand that each opportunity is an opportunity to compete and match up possession by possession and maybe not tackle the game as a whole. But I think for competitors like Laxa, Flores, Jesperson, who have done this and who have bright futures in the game of women's basketball, they're salivating at this opportunity. No one ever says, oh, it's UConn, we're not going to play.
Well, let's move on and talk about the yearly awards. The majority, rather, of the league's awards will be announced on Friday, except a small handful will be announced on Saturday in a pregame press conference. So let's talk about some of those candidates. Now, Freshman of the Year, who are a couple people, Monica, in your mind, that are up for this award?
Well, I'm thinking of Imari Thomas for the Cincinnati Bearcats. I think that she's had a very solid season. She's been a steady contributor, and she's been one that Coach Elliott can rely on. This award is always a little bit tricky because I think freshmen get a bad rap. I don't know if it's a bad rap or if it's just par for the course. You feel like you can't live without freshmen. You can't necessarily live with freshmen. But Imari Thomas and my other candidate would be Mia Davis at Temple. They are young women who demonstrated a level of poise and maturity that was a little bit beyond their years. Particularly for Davis having to step up big considering the injuries that Temple had to deal with. But she was consistent. I think she was productive, as both of these young ladies were. So those would be my top two for Rookie of the Year.
Moving on, let's talk Player of the Year candidates. Who are a couple of women that stick out to you?
Well, I think you could say at least 4 of the starting 5 for the UConn Huskies. And I am going to go with the Huskies in terms of those being my candidates. I think Katie Lou Samuelson has had a tremendous year. My other candidate would be Gabby Williams, who you may look at the stat sheet and say, well, she wasn't necessarily leading, but I think because Williams was so active in so many different categories for the Huskies, you have to give her due diligence in terms of considering her for that reward. When you think of Katie Lou Samuelson, I think she's one that we've just been able to really enjoy evolve over the course of her career. Yes, she's playing at UConn. She's already on the top stage on the best team in women's college basketball. But even this year, I think her game took a step. And I think it was more than just the physical things that she can do, because we know that she's very talented. It was her mentality. I mean, I always think back to Texas, and she's in a position to knock down those free throws and comes up short. But what I also remember from Texas is her eye in terms of this grit. And we've heard Gino talk in the past that, oh, she's a California kid, we got to rough her up a little bit. I think she's starting to show the grit that he wants to see. And I wouldn't be surprised if she takes away that award this season.
Lastly, let's talk about the coaches a little bit. And this award, you know, can go probably several different ways. But when you look back at the seasons that these teams have had, which coaches stick out to you?
Well, again, I'm going back to Houston. We talked about Houston and Cincinnati, rightfully so, that they would have players or coaches, that are involved in the postseason awards. I think Coach Huey has done a tremendous job with the Cougars. You look at the 4 games that they won last year in conference play, the 14 games they won on the season, and they not only win 20 games this year and finish 5th in the conference, but they also are receiving votes in a poll. So I think that really speaks to the potential that his program has and the big picture philosophy that he's starting to put in place in Houston. And I also think you gotta, and this one's weird for me, I think you have to acknowledge Coach Fernandez, but almost in the same breath that you had acknowledged Coach Auriemma, right? There are things that we've come to expect if you've been following the South Florida program, and they're no strangers to the postseason. I believe they're going into either their 7th or 8th run this year. Obviously, they'll make the postseason. We expect that. So I think what may have put South Florida on the radar more than they have been was that win over Ohio State this season. So those would be my top 2. I also would throw in an honorable mention for Coach Heather Macy. Now, her team didn't necessarily finish in a position that is to be lauded, but when you consider what she was doing with that program and the players that she had, I mean, she really had those guys in the mix.
Well, if you all have been tuning in for the majority of this season, you will know that Monica's predictions tend to be pretty on point. So we'll have to hold you to these when I see you at Mohegan Sun in just a few days. Monica, it's been great having you on each week, and we'll continue doing this at the tournament.
It's going to be so fun to do this in person, Haley. I can't wait.
All right, thanks a lot to Monica, and thanks to all of you. We're going to have full wraparound coverage each day of the championship, which will include press conferences, post-game interviews, and highlights. Then the day of the final, I'll be joined by Monica for a 1-hour pre- and post-game show to bring you all of the action from the title game. It should be a great 4 days in Uncasville. We hope to see you there.